fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCBQ 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren. Mr. Eric Shapiro, or the doctor as we call him, is here.
Al, how are you?
I'm delicious.
Oh, excellent. I missed you. I always miss you when you're not around.
Well, you know, I miss me too when I'm not around.
Yeah.
The thing is, you know, I just disappear.
Yeah. Don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah, I'm no longer there. I'm just not.
Right. Well, that's a pretty depressing update.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's all about the holidays. The holidays passed by. I didn't even realize I was so kind of caught up in things here. But
Yeah.
So what do you do for New Year's? You stay up? Do you watch that any of those late shows and the balls dropping?
You know, it kind of brings me down. I don't really like it that much. I actually, the past couple years, just for my kids' sake, because they're just old enough where they can stay up and see it, I've watched it with them. But I kind of can't stand New Year's in general. I don't mean to be a downer about it, but I think all the hype about new beginnings, like it's like the moment where people that never get anything accomplished speak the loudest about how great it's going to be. And I think people that are more driven are like, all right, can we just get on with a normal week already? So I'm sorry to be so negative about it. Yeah, I kind of lay low.
No, I'm the same way. I agree. I run through the programs from NBC, like they show, you get all the segments, and I look through to see what everyone was doing on New Year's, and I don't stay up. I don't waste my time. You know, when I want to do something, it doesn't have to be January 1st for me to do it. You know.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I remember my grandparents used to say, oh, it's just another day. And I thought that was so sad that they had that attitude, but I've sort of gotten there on my own. It's like, yeah, it's just, I mean, come on, it's the calendar. Yeah. And, I might go into a different phase where it excites me again someday, but at the moment I'm like, yeah, let's just get this.
You know, and I think I'm getting old. I think I'm a stranger in the world because, you know, I'm watching through and watching the CNN leaks, and it was like, you know, Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper. And of course, they're not great. And, you know, while everyone's celebrating and they're doing just before the countdown, they're talking about people that got killed and hanging in Iran and all these sort of things going on. I'm thinking,
oh my God, right.
It's kind of depressing while you're, you know, 10 minutes to midnight and everyone's going to do the countdown.
Right. I agree. I also think COVID has sort of added like an atmosphere of like, all right, like we're all a little reluctant to look forward to the future. Like we just get to a more stable place.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's a tough thing to be out there in the streets.
I guess.
But I'm glad. Look, I'm glad it's a new year. I'm looking forward to this new year. I actually didn't have the best year last year, so I'm all for it.
Yeah. So, you know, let's hope for something good. Well, you know, so now we're going to talk about horror today, right? We got the director of a new movie called Fang. That's close to, I made a movie once called something like that, but it wasn't called Fang. It didn't have the N in it. So
okay.
So let's.
Why would you? How could you provoke me to laugh? Like
because
I'm gonna have problems. I'm gonna have problems for the rest of my life.
Well, I'm here to disrupt things, right?
Yeah,
isn't that kind of what artists do, right?
Yeah, that's true. No, I'm with you. I'll always support.
Well, there you go, like a jockstrap. Yeah. So anyway, so now let's get Richard Harji Burgin on. So Richard, you've got a new movie out and you call it Fang.
That's right, Al. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm the writer and director of Fang and executive producer, casting director, and a bunch of other roles. That's what we do on Low Budget Movie. Everybody has like 10 different jobs.
Yeah.
But writer and director is the most important.
But does that make it harder, do you find? Like when you're making a movie and you have so many responsibilities, don't you feel a lot more pressure?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure to do it, although at the same time, I think that pressure can also be inspiring, because it's, especially when you're writing something that's horror or it's suspenseful, is that, you want to feel that intense anxiety because that gets you plugged into what you're doing, and then you can connect to the characters who are feeling intense anxiety over their lives. And I think that makes it more real when, you're feeling a lot of the same anxiety and pressure yourself for thankfully different reasons, but it's, I think it's all interconnected.
So in essence, you're making a movie to distress people because you're distressed.
Oh, there you go. I'm spreading the stress around.
Wait, Richard, what was the budget on your film, if you don't mind us asking?
The budget ended up being, I think, about $150,000 by the end, which is more than I originally planned on. But, when it's like, one thing I've learned as a filmmaker is that, like when you're planning out a budget for a movie, you got to plan for things going wrong, because on every movie that you make, something will go wrong. It's only a matter of time. There's no such thing as a completely smooth film shoot, even if you have a higher budget. So by the end, the budget of Fang ended up being about $50,000 higher than I originally planned. My original thought was I can make $100,000 movie, so it ended up being a $150,000 movie. But, I think, that it could have been a lot worse. It could have been, because I've heard about movies where the budget tripled by the end of it, or even more than that.
Right.
So I think you have to plan for, contingency, insurance. You got to plan for things not going according to plan. I think that's a very important lesson that I learned.
Wait, so at what point did you see the budget going up? Like when did you sense it creeping upward?
Before we started filming, it already went up by $20,000.
Oh, okay, just in the pre-production.
In pre-production, it was already going up because I talked to my producer and cinematographer. They were like, "We don't think this could be made for $100,000," and I'm like, "Okay, it's more money than I thought, but you got to be flexible and you got to stay committed to it. Even when the movie is driving you insane, you got to stay committed to it."
And what did you do? So you put together private money, I presume, to make the movie. So when you ran into overages, what did you do? You went back to the investors and said, "Hey, look, we need more."
Yeah, well, I took a big risk by making this, and this goes into my own, personal background and what inspired the making of Fang in the first place. And, in retrospect, it was not a responsible decision for me to make Fang, but I'm really glad I did. I'm really glad I took this crazy risk because, and I think, with all movies, it's a crazy risk that, that leads to making it, because if, you're doing something that's risk-free, then you're not making movies. You're working like at an office or something. You're doing a sensible job. But I felt like, back then that I have a story to tell, and, I'm willing to, put my own ass on the line to tell it. I'm willing to risk money that I have in my own family to make this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, the words artist and responsible don't belong in the same sentence. So it's like, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. So tell us more about the story in terms of, give us a preview of what it is and why it's so personal to you.
Well, Fang tells the story of a young man named Billy Cochran. He's a janitor. He lives with his mother, Gina, and they have like kind of a dysfunctional relationship, as many families do. And Billy has autism, so he has a lot of issues relating to people. He is very kind of isolated and alienated, and his mother, Gina, much like my dad, is dying from Parkinson's. And so she has her own issues relating to other people, because the disease is getting increasingly worse for her. It is clouding her mind. It is making it harder for her to have good judgment. And so one night, Billy wakes up. He goes to use the bathroom at home, and there's this rat in the bathtub. And so the rat jumps out, it chases Billy around the house, and it bites him. And from that point forward, Billy starts turning into a rat. He starts seeing rat fur on his skin. He starts to feel more and more rat-like, and he's having these rat urges. And so that's the most I can say without giving too much away.
First of all, for the listeners, I've seen the movie and I thought it was excellent. That's why I wanted to have you on. It's fantastic. And we also talked about after I watched it, and I think people are probably gleaning this from just listening to what you just said. It is intended to be kind of funny, right? Like it's horror, but the transformation into a rat struck me while I was watching it as intentionally absurd.
It is, to some degree. I like the idea of mixing kind of like comedy and tragedy, because I think, people think that it's like mutually exclusive, but I think that, something can be absurd and tragic or funny and horrifying at the same time. I don't think it has to be one or the other. It can be both. Life is funny and horrifying, at least according to me.
What was the atmosphere like on set? Was it lighthearted and were people having a good time, or was it more of a heavy, serious atmosphere?
It was a mix of both. It was a very intense film shoot. We shot it in over 23 days in January and February in Chicago, so the weather was not warm. But, it's kind of a bonding experience when you have this shared, difficult experience of filming, and I think that, we had a few conflicts on set, but by the end of it, I think we felt, very close by the end of the filming of Fang. I think, there was definitely a lot of joking around on set too. So I think, when you have this kind of experience, it could be a bonding experience, or it could drive people completely far apart. It can go either way.
Well, how many people were in the cast and crew, roughly?
I think it was about, like, at any given time, probably, I think there were like 17 or 18 acting roles total. And then we had probably about that number of people in the crew total, too. So it wasn't a huge number of people on set at any given time, which I think helps, for having more of like a tight-knit, feeling.
Yeah, I have to ask Al, the host, the question. Al, have you ever transformed into a rat?
I do it every day.
Yeah. See, I figure that's part of why I wanted Richard on, because he's an expert.
No, well, but that leads to the question of what does that represent to you, Richard? Like, what does the rat itself or the transformation into that represent to you, being as it's such a, let's say, an inspirational or, something that means something to you in the making of this?
Well, that is a great question, Al. What I think that the rat means to me, and this isn't what I originally thought when I wrote Fang, because I've been, working with this story, for several years now. So what I've realized is that what the rat means to me is the rat is everything we want to deny about ourselves. The rat is the dark side. The rat is, these kind of antisocial, animalistic urges that we have, because, we always want to present our best selves. We want to be good people. We want to be responsible people. We want to be members of society. But then we have a different side of our personality that is not that. We have the ugly side of our personality, and that's what the rat represents to me. And I think the rat is also like a metaphor for autism too, because Billy doesn't want to admit to himself that he is different from other people, that he's autistic. And so it is everything that he is repressing and denying about his own personality that becomes the rat, that is the rat side of who he is. But the rat is also natural too. It's just there, and he has to find a way to accept it before he feels overwhelmed by it.
Richard, you're on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
It's pronounced Asperger's, right? Asperger's syndrome?
Yeah, I'm on the very high functioning end of the spectrum, although I've had my less functioning moments.
So can you, and also, Al is as well. So you guys, you both have that in common. And I've always been curious to ask Al more about it. So now I'll get to ask both of you. I mean, what I always wonder with Asperger's is like, how do you know, because both of you guys are very high functioning. I would never be able to tell in either case, but like, how do you figure out that there's a difference in terms of not being, I guess they call it like, you're not neurotypical, right? That's how they phrase it.
No.
So, I also know the term mind blind, like it's hard for you, or maybe the varying degrees hard for you to pick up on other people's feelings, but tell me what the experience is like.
Well, for me, I grew up in a different time. I was growing up in the 60s. So at that time, there was no, sort of, let's say, initiative or no sort of, thought given to it other than I was being difficult and not responding. So they had a different response to it. So it gave me a much later start to it because, the biggest thing is recognizing other people's feelings and trying to react appropriately. And that was the biggest problem, especially in the 60s, because they thought they were much more about manners and appearance. And so of course you don't act or react the way you're supposed to, or you do things or say things that are totally out of the blue.
Right.
Because you start to try to force yourself to be involved in situations at time to try to be more normal, let's say. That's what the pressure is. So, and you find yourself doing things that seem stupid or saying totally inappropriate things in the middle of a conversation that makes everyone stop and look at you because you didn't know what else to say.
Right.
And
so I'm going to interrupt. Like, you figured out this was going on because you kept getting bad feedback from other people. Is that what it was? That eventually you were like, okay, you had to admit, like the dam broke, and you had to admit that this is something that you are dealing with.
Yeah, and it took me a long time because what I did was I kind of spent more time to myself. Especially through school. And it wasn't until college age that I started to push myself out, so to speak. I started to try to become involved or find out why I thought everyone disliked me, so to speak, or didn't.
Right. Richard, is it the same sort of trajectory for you in terms of like, okay, you're saying the inappropriate thing and then the feedback is bad and then you have to course correct? Is that kind of how this goes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything Al said is something I can identify with too. Although when I got to college, I had already been diagnosed with it before then when I was 4 years old. But when I got into college, I decided that I don't really have Asperger's. Right. I was misdiagnosed. And so I started a phase of being in denial about it. And when my therapist at college told me that I had it, I was like, no, I don't. And I argued with her. So that denial of it made things worse for the couple of years that I went through that phase. And eventually when I was able to admit to myself and to other people that, okay, I actually do have Asperger's, this is a real problem. And then things started to turn around for me. So once I was able to accept that this is who I am, this is my nature, that was when I started on an upward trajectory instead of getting
So both
worse.
you guys, like right now while I'm talking to you, are you both being mindful and exerting about not saying anything insulting? Is that constantly going on?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay.
I haven't thought of anything insulting to say right now. I can honestly say that.
Well, Al and I are such winning personalities.
And I don't know. But I don't know that it would be insulting anyway. It's not that
that's not the framework.
Yeah, because that's not, I never have an intention. Yeah. And I'm not looking at, insulting someone or making someone.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
I'm not looking at attacking anybody. For me personally, it's more about, you see people being themselves and being comfortable with each other and developing close relationships with each other, and you want to be a part of it, sort of. So you throw what you think out, and then you just have to regulate what you say at certain times. And
it's a communication.
Yeah. But nowadays, I've made a business out of it.
I was just going to say, I mean, you're an iconoclast, like you're a raconteur, so you have your hand so firmly on the clutch that you can actually, with intention, say the inappropriate thing and know that it's funny, because you're so experienced now and understanding where the line is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that society today, right now, understands that people under a challenge, or people that are in a minority, so to speak, of any sort of category, they sort of let you have leeway.
Oh, that's interesting too. So that's sort of a blessing that things sort of ventilated in that regard. But when I said insulting, it was sort of like a shorthand for where, like, I know a mistake can be made, it can be inappropriate, the line can be stepped over, but I never would have imagined, I know it's not like an aggression thing where anybody wants to hurt somebody's feelings, but it is interesting to sort of explore and wonder, before you guys started managing it, how did it look from the inside? How would you describe the unawareness of the line? I know it's like really like an abstract thing.
I think it's more just a reaction you get from people.
Yeah.
It's a learned thing.
Oh, so it's a learned thing.
I mean, if you're unaware of it, then it feels like, you're a mess. Things keep getting screwed up for you, and it's hard to understand
why,
and it's hard to understand, people until you start to get a better understanding of them. And I think it's, and it could be humbling too, because, another thing is that, I have been, and it's a complicated thing, because when you consistently get negative feedback from the people around you, that can have a negative effect on your personality, to the point where you do start, intentionally being bad, where you start intentionally being negative, and it kind of turns you against people.
Right. It like radicalizes.
And I guess that's kind of the plot of Fang too, is that after this keeps happening for Billy and Gina, is that because they're suffering so much from their conditions, and, that people around them don't really have empathy for them, then that kind of hardens them, and they become turned against other people. And so it's kind of a vicious circle. So I've come to realize that I'm not completely innocent either, and I do have to be consciously aware of other people and not wanting to hurt people. And I absolutely have things I've done that I regret. And I think that's part of it too, is that, once you kind of realize that, is that you're the victim, but you can be the villain too. That I think, that helps me, understand myself better and other people better.
Right. And it sounds like in both your cases,
the
desire is there for human connection. It seems like that's the key. So it's like you want to get there, but you realize that the initial road with your initial instincts is bumpy. So there's a process of relearning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know that I'll ever be as well adjusted as younger people today that have this.
Yeah.
Because for me, I've learned to set up the setting. The setting has got to be on my terms.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've learned that I don't attend certain events or certain things because of who I am.
Okay.
I have to have control over the setting.
Yeah.
And that way I can be more open, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, for example, you avoid Jews.
Well, I just don't want to step on their tails.
Right. No, wait. So, what's an example? What's an example of a setting that you avoid?
Well, radio's perfect, whereas television I hate.
But you do it. You force yourself to do it. I know it's very stressful for you.
Because that's it. I force myself, because each time I do that, I become better at handling people, because if you know, most of the times, and the very first television shows or things that I've done, I was probably an absolute awful person to work with, because they, my actions and reactions were probably hard for them to take. And so it's become better now. I'm much better at it, but I still have to keep myself away from certain situations, because I know that I won't handle it very well. And I'm not trying to get better at certain things.
Right. I mean,
I can only take so much. Yeah. And plus I'm 60 now, so I can only do so much in my life, and I have to focus on what I'm doing. So, but I put myself in settings, and that's why I select, certain co-hosts, certain people around me. I select to be around me because I sort of trust their nature more than just their talent, because there's a lot of talented people, but how do you select someone? It's because of their behavior, their nature, who they are. And then when you get enough of them around you, you start to function within that wall pretty good.
Yeah. Al's going to inform me next week that I'm fired. So it's all, and I don't want to stay on the topic too much, but my last question with Asperger's is, it's all when you talk about going into these settings and having these landmines, it's all interpersonal, right? It's like the liability and risk is all somebody getting agitated or a message being mixed and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can totally wreck you. For me, it'll totally wreck me if I make a mistake and it's really noticeable and I really, really understand it now. Yeah. So sometimes it could really wreck my, what do you call,
homeostasis.
Yeah. And so the way I perform then becomes not very good.
Right. Because then do you feel like ashamed? Like you feel like, man, sort of thing?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's the word, but I certainly don't feel like I shut down.
Okay. Got it. What about you, Richard? And I have another question about directing films, but go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, I mean it, it really does not feel good when you make mistakes. And the problem is that, it's hard to apologize for something without sounding insincere, because when a lot of people say sorry, they don't really mean it. But I do genuinely regret, hurting people's feelings by mistake, because it really is a mistake, and I realize in retrospect, oh my, now I realize why that was bad.
You have to sort of put the pieces.
It's hard to come back from that.
Yeah. And I was curious also, because directing a movie and bringing it back to Fang is leadership. So that's a whole other burden. Like Al's talking about being on camera and all the interpersonal stress of being with a crew. Then Richard, I was thinking about you with you're at the head of that crew. And then that's a whole other, I don't have Asperger's, but when I direct a film, I'm completely stressed out almost the entire time. So and because of the interpersonal things, because I feel like you're constantly being judged, you're answering 1,000 questions every day, and it's just exhausting. So I'm just curious your comments, and it doesn't have to be Asperger's related if you want to get off the topic, but just your comments on being a leader.
Well, it is, I'll say this, being, in that position is hard, but it's not the hardest position I've been in, because, when I'm making, a movie like Fang, this is, my zone, basically. This is a movie idea that I came up with, so it's more on my terms. And, with Fang, there's more respect, for me and what I came up with, because I wrote the script and I'm directing it. And, so I have this position. And even though, I've had plenty of conflicts before on set, I can work to resolve it. And, I'm willing to compromise with people, but I think it's just easier actually when you have that position where it's kind of built in kind of respect and status with other people, because then you're not just randomly there. What was much harder for me than directing Fang was, just being at school. And, my college years were really stressful and depressing for me, because I had a hard time, expressing any of my positive traits, but my negative traits were on display for a lot of people to see. And so now at least I'm able, to show people what I'm capable of in a good way. And the bad things about me can be mitigated. And I have more awareness of who I am now, and I can compromise more with people. So I think it's definitely gotten easier for me over time.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, that's really positive. So it's also like, it presupposes that you desire to keep doing it. Like it's a role where you really feel comfortable.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what was it that drew you? Like, what is it you wanted people to get out of the film?
Well, that's something I've thought before. What is the message of Fang? And I guess I don't really have a specific message in mind. I just want people to have the experience of watching it, and then I guess you can read into it what you want. I've heard, different feedback from people who've watched Fang, and I've heard very different things about it. People have very different ideas of what it all means or what it means to them. So I guess what I want is, I want it to mean something personal to you when you watch it.
Yeah, when I was watching it, what really stood out for me, particularly because of its indie nature, usually when I see movies that are in their budget ranges in the hundreds of thousands, a lot of times when they're well done, like yours is really, really well made. Usually they're self-serious. They can be pretentious, and that might still mean they're okay or they work. But I thought it was really interesting how Fang is like openly absurd, and there were points where I was laughing out loud, and I was like, wow, that's really good that he has that ability to manage the comedic tone, even though you're saying other people might have reacted differently. That was my experience. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but there were definitely moments where I was like, oh, okay, this is just like, it seemed like, even though aesthetically it's very commanding and the compositions are really strong and the editing and performances are strong, it's also like there's a madcap sort of lunacy to it, which I found appealing.
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, I think it's, I guess I don't take myself too seriously in general, because I think, if you do let things get to your head too much, where you start thinking, I'm this misunderstood genius, nobody understands me. And it's like, no, people do. There are a lot of other people who have the same kinds of ideas that you do. There are like thousands of people who want to make movies. I'm not exactly unique. And so I guess that's kind of my perspective on it. And I do want, I want people to empathize with the characters, but also question them too, because definitely, in Fang, Billy is absolutely victimized, by his environment. He is not surrounded by very many supportive people, but he also causes problems himself too. So I like the idea of having that kind of complexity where it's like partially, the problem is things that have been, that are beyond your control and things that are just in your environment. And part of the problem is also the way you react to it too. So I think it's a mixture of both.
Yeah, that really does come across. You captured that well. And it's good to talk. It's interesting to get into it more and also realize that the Asperger's symbolism is there, and then all the social dynamics you described that go with it are being depicted there. And something else I wanted to touch on that you told me that was really funny and I thought really fascinating is, didn't you say that this is sort of, to some extent, a riff on or a satire of like an after-school special?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, like when I started getting the idea to do Fang, and it's kind of funny because when I was younger and I was in my denial phase, I was thinking, okay, I'm never going to make a movie about Asperger's because I don't want to be associated with it. And then as I got older and I started to get more understanding of myself, and I realized, well, this is something I've experienced firsthand, to some degree. This is my story, and so I should make a movie about it. However, what I wanted to do was I did not want to make the typical movie about it, because most movies about characters who have a disability or they have some kind of terminal disease, you know, they want it to be very like kind of like inspiring for people. They want to say that these characters are overcoming adversity. They're overcoming these obstacles in their life. And with Fang, I want to say, no, you know, disability is not inspiring. It's just something that is, you know, it's beyond our control. We don't always have to be inspiring to other people. That's kind of one of the things I wanted to get across. And I wanted to kind of parody like the whole inspirational disease genre in Fang.
Yeah, that's really good. That puts a big smile on my face, because it's interesting, because the big thing right now is representation, which is great, and I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And I don't even say that halfway. Like, being Jewish, if I see Jewish people represented, I usually respond positively, and I really appreciate the effort that went into it. On the other hand, the inspirational expectation that always goes with it can be annoying. It's like, just because we're representing doesn't mean it has to be like solemn, or like that can actually really pour cold water on the experience. So I think to represent your own experience in a way that's insane makes it more fun. Like, it's like, or not even more fun, but it makes it fun, you know, for starters.
Yeah, well, thank you. And, you know, I think too, you know, with representation, you know, if you're representing, you know, people from different groups or people from different backgrounds, you know, you want to show that, like, the best way to show that we're all human is not to treat the characters with kid gloves, because absolutely you could be autistic and be a complete asshole for reasons that have nothing to do with autism. And I think, you know, that's the best way to humanize, you know, characters with disabilities and diseases, is to show that, you know, we're not all perfect, we're not saintly, we're not all overcoming adversity.
Yeah, that's a great,
so
that in and of itself is a fantastic theme. And also the splitting apart of quote unquote ailment or disorder, because I have OCD, and one thing I like to make, like, sort of like mess with people's heads with, and I don't do it as much because I've gotten older, but you know, people, when they know you have it, they assume every single thing you're saying or doing is an outgrowth of it, which is ridiculous. Like they completely undermine the fact that you have a hugely vast and complex personality and nature. And sometimes, yes, my OCD is flared up, or yes, I'm asking this question because I'm feeling obsessive, of course. But then, you know, a lot of times it's like, no, you're dealing with an idiosyncrasy that does not spur the categorization of the disorder, and people can paint you completely with that brush, and it's annoying. And it also goes hand in hand with them just thinking you're crazy, and then just, you know, thinking you belong behind a locked door, and that's it. So it's good to break that and explain that, like, no, humanity is, like, you know, transcends all these categories.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's, you know, it's just like one part of, you know, who we are, the way your brain is wired. And, you know, you can put two people with Asperger's together, and they might have completely different interests. They might not get along at all.
Right.
And that is sometimes the case.
Yeah, no, well said. That's a good point. And I'm also curious, and this goes for both of you also, bringing it back to that topic, like what the relationship is as communicators and artists to emotion. Because if one thing you guys do have in common, you guys happen to have in common, is you're both funny, right? Or your work expresses humor. So I'm curious if there's something to that, or like, because again, just like for the most of the listeners are not going to have an avenue through the emotional landscape of somebody with Asperger's. Like, so I'm just wondering, like, is emotion a priority when you're expressing yourself, or like, how is that built from within your world?
Well, if you're talking to me,
sure.
I find humor's that, you know, for me, what it did was it started when I was younger, and I was starting to try to copy people's reactions to fit in. And a lot of times, especially girls would turn to me and say, I can never tell if you're serious or if you're going to be funny. And after a while, I thought, you know, maybe I should do this as to be funny.
That should be your strength.
Yeah, because no matter what, people like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You're more approachable. You're more acceptable. You know, if you're kind of someone that they want to be around because you're funny. And so I started working that angle and tried to make everything as fun as possible.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about you, Al, and I've co-hosted with you dozens of times now, and I always have no doubt when you're joking, like you're hitting the button with complete control and intention. Like I never feel that you're just being funny, like you just so happen to be being funny. It always seems like you just dial in very deadpan, like mischievously for like, okay, I'm going to hit the button right now. Am I correct?
Yes,
yeah,
totally.
And it's a thing.
I've had 60 years to practice this. Yes.
Yeah.
I've practiced this a long time.
Wow. Okay. What about you, Richard, with emotion?
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that, you know, with Fang and, you know, with other stuff that I've written, you know, for the screen is that, you know, people can have like intense reactions to it and even more intense reactions than I'm expecting. Like with Fang, you know, after, you know, I showed it to some people, I had the premiere and I sent the movie to different distributors, you know, to watch for distribution. And, you know, there's one guy who I'm talking to on the distribution side who said that he had to stop watching it 30 minutes in because this is almost too painful for him to watch because it reminds him of his own family. And other people have told me that too, that, you know, it really hits them hard and it resonates with their own, you know, their own family experiences. And other people watch it and say, you know, this is like a dark comedy. This is, you know, this is very entertaining and everything like that. So I think it definitely, I definitely can produce strong reactions in people for better or worse. And that kind of goes along with the whole like accidentally upsetting people, is that I can accidentally make something more intense than I was planning on, or I can be funny without intending to. Although a lot of times I am being intentionally funny too, and sometimes I don't even know if I'm trying to be funny or not. I'm being funny and serious at the same time.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. It's interesting to manage tone. You also, I don't know if you're at liberty to share it, but privately you were telling me you had some good news on the distribution front, didn't you?
Oh yeah, no, I've been in talks with several distributors. I got my first contract about a week ago. I'm still working out all the details, but I think Fang will be unleashed on the general public sometime this year.
So what sort of distribution are you talking about with them? Is it streaming, cable? What's under discussion?
Well, Fang will most likely be going to DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming. I would love to get it in more theaters, too. I've submitted it to a number of film festivals as well, and I'm waiting to hear back on the results. And, you know, for anybody else who's listening to this, who's going through this process with their own movie, I mean, it's all subjective. You know, you could make like something that is like really, you know, brilliant and masterful and better than what I've created, but people will still reject it, you know, because it's just subjective. Everybody has a different idea of what they're looking for. And so I think that's something that you kind of have to accept. You have to find a distributor and a festival, you know, who is looking for something like this, or even if they aren't looking for it, you know, then they watch it and realize, I didn't know this is what I was looking for, and I really like this, and I wanna be on the same team as this guy. But, you know, it's all about, you know, finding people, you know, who get what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And it's all about, in the end, it comes down to compatibility. It's like what Al was saying about his co-hosts. It's just people he has a feel for and a trust. And it comes down to the same thing with selecting a film. It's like they might think it's excellent, but it's just not the right year for it. It's not going to fit in their lineup. Like they have different themes they're pursuing or agendas and things like that. Good luck. I mean, with the festivals,
thank you.
Yeah, as you wait for feedback to come in.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you know, I'm really happy with the way most people have really responded positively to Fang so far. And, you know, like, I can't ask for much more than that. I just hope that, you know, it's something that people can connect to. And, you know, I hope it's something that sticks with people. And, you know, it's a movie that, you know, means something for people who watch it. I don't know what it means, but I hope it means something.
Yeah. Now, so how do people get a hold of you? Where do they find the movie now? Or where do they find you or anything you've done before and stuff? What's your contacts?
Oh, well, right now you can look me up on social media. I'm on Facebook, and I'm also on IMDb too, but soon I'm going to have like a revamped social media presence and website, because I got to get myself more, you know, like get all the professional stuff set up, because I have some interesting years ahead. And you know, I will be very vocal once Fang gets distribution. I will be hawking.
How dare you!
Out of Fang, I will be like, this is where you buy it. This is where you watch it. Watch Fang now.
Yeah. So, was it difficult filming over the pandemic part?
Well, we filmed Fang right before the pandemic started. It was finished like a month before the pandemic really hit, so we had incredibly lucky timing with that.
Yeah. You'll have to do a sequel. This time the rat turns into a human.
Right.
Oh, yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Well, the rat within never completely goes away.
Well, you know, I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you talking about the movie, and I hope it does well.
Oh, thank you, Ollie. Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to people and that. And you know, what's next for you? Where do you go from here?
Well, Eric and I have talked about working together, and I can't say too much about that yet because it's still in the very early stages, but we have very strong, you know, instincts for collaborating together. I think we want a lot of the same things in our movies. And I also have several other projects that I'm working on. I have a new script that I'm hopefully going to get to film soon. It's called Broken Angels, and what it's about is like this guy is like this very like he's like the opposite of autistic. He's like very charismatic, suave, kind of socially skilled, popular guy. And he's campaigning to be elected senator of Florida. So he has all of these kind of typical cliched politician phrases. You know, he knows how to manipulate people to get what he wants, but he has a double life as this kind of psychopathic sexual predator. And so the other characters start to discover the truth about him, and they have to figure out a way to convince people that this guy is really evil, that he is destructive, but it's hard because he's so good at kind of manipulating people to be on his side.
Wow. Yeah. How did you get the Santos to go along with it?
Oh, there's a lot of people that were an inspiration for this story.
Yeah. I want to say I read that screenplay, Broken Angels. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Eric.
Yeah, and I've been that was before I saw Fang. I was like, wow, this guy's really good. He's got major chops, and it's always a pleasure when that happens because it's not the norm. You. Yeah, and I think Richard, you have extraordinary days ahead as a filmmaker, and I couldn't be more excited about the stuff you're referring to that we'll be collaborating on.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and I would say the same for you, too. You have extraordinary days ahead for getting your work out there to more and more people. I am definitely...
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm definitely a fan of your writing, and I think it dovetails nicely with a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in as a filmmaker. And we have different styles, but I think they go together well.
Well, what kind of movie are you going to make? Is it like a pornography?
Right.
Possibly.
Yeah. So it's funny. There's potential elements of that theme in there. Yeah.
Oh, geez, how did I know that?
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Again, you know, we've been talking to Richard Burgin, and he's the director and writer and behind the movie Fang. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I would like to thank everybody I worked with on Fang. I couldn't do it without my producer, Rob, or my cinematographer, Jason, or any of the actors. All of the actors in Fang did a wonderful job playing their characters. So I would like to thank everybody, who worked with me on Fang. I couldn't have done it alone.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night. This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.